If you find yourself in a position where you're constantly being asked to do things that compromise your integrity, make you feel weak or ashamed of yourself, the best course of action is simple. Stop. Don't do them. Now, this isn't a flippant statement or a call for rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It's a call to reclaim your agency in the face of forces that would otherwise see you become a passive participant in your own destruction. This isn't just about refusing to do what's wrong. It's about taking ownership of your life, your actions, and the direction you're headed. The choices you make daily either build you up or break you down. And if you're being required to do something that breaks you down, it's essential to stop, take stock, and ask yourself, what am I allowing to happen and why? Too many people stay in situations that stifle their potential, erode their sense of self-worth, and ultimately lead them into a state of chronic dissatisfaction. Maybe it's because the job seems secure, and there's a fear that walking away could result in instability. But a job that crushes your soul, no matter how safe it feels, is still a prison. It may provide financial security, but emotional and mental security is just as important, if not more so. What happens when you're in a job that is secure but devoid of challenge? You might convince yourself it's okay because, after all, you're being paid and you have benefits. But deep down, there's a gnawing feeling that something isn't right. That feeling grows stronger each day, and soon enough you'll realize that while your bank account may be stable, your sense of purpose is eroding. This is a dangerous place to be because humans are not designed to live in stasis. We are not meant to remain stagnant. We are built to take on challenges, to solve problems, to carry heavy loads, and not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. It is through this that we grow stronger, sharper, and more resilient. Challenge is what makes us human. Without it, we wither. It's what pushes us to evolve. Imagine an athlete who only ever lifts light weights. Their muscles will never grow and their performance will plateau. The same is true for your mind and spirit. If you're not pushing yourself to confront difficulties, to wrestle with complex problems, and to stretch beyond your comfort zone, you're not growing. And if you're not growing, you're slowly decaying. Life, by its very nature, is extraordinarily difficult. There's no avoiding that reality. The obstacles and adversities we face are constant. And if you're not prepared, if you're not mentally strong and sharp, those challenges will overwhelm you. And it's not just about surviving your own difficulties. There's always something trying to tear down the structures around us, whether it's in your family, your workplace, or society as a whole. Corruption, dysfunction, and decay are always lurking, and they can take hold more quickly than we realize. This is why you need to be vigilant. You have to stay awake, sharp, and prepared to push back against those forces that seek to corrupt. And that's not an easy task. It requires a deep level of awareness and education. You need to understand history because, as the saying goes, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. You need to learn how to think critically, how to read deeply, how to articulate your thoughts clearly, and how to take a stand when necessary. This vigilance isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting those around you, your family, your community, your workplace, your state. When you turn a blind eye to dysfunction, corruption, or wrongdoing, you're allowing it to spread. The decay doesn't stop with you. It infiltrates everything it touches, and soon the structures you relied on for support, the ones you thought were stable, begin to crumble. What does a good day at work look like? It's a day when you lose track of time because you're so engaged in what you're doing. You're in a state of flow, where the hours pass effortlessly, and you leave work feeling a sense of accomplishment. Compare that to a day when you're in a toxic or oppressive work environment. Every minute drags. You're constantly checking the clock, wishing time would move faster. When you find yourself in this situation, it's a clear signal that something is wrong. It's like being back in grade school, watching the second hand on the clock inch its way around the dial, feeling like you're trapped in a never-ending loop of monotony and frustration. I once visited my daughter's school and sat in on a class where the teacher had the children reading aloud to one another. Some of the children couldn't read at all, and as I sat there, it brought back memories of my own time in school, watching the clock tick away, feeling like I was wasting my time, and struggling to maintain my composure. If I had to sit in that classroom for 3 days, even as a grown adult, I'd misbehave just like I did when I was a kid. That's what happens when you're trapped in an environment that stifles your growth. You become restless, frustrated, and eventually, you act out. Now imagine being in a workplace like that, where pathological things are happening daily, and you're expected to go along with them. You know something's wrong, but maybe you're afraid to speak up. Maybe you're worried about making enemies or rocking the boat. It's easier to keep your head down and just get through the day, right? But what's the cost of that? What are you sacrificing in the process? The reality is that if you're forced to do things that make you feel weak, ashamed, or compromised, you're paying a high price, whether you realize it or not. You lose your self-respect, and once that's gone, it's incredibly difficult to get back. Worse still, by complying with the dysfunction, you're allowing the corrupt and weak to win. You're giving them power over you, and in doing so, you become an agent of your own destruction. What's even more concerning is that this isn't just an individual problem. When sensible people stay silent, dysfunction multiplies. This is especially true in workplaces, where mid-level bureaucratic tyranny seems to flourish. The reason it spreads is that too many people who know better, stay quiet when they should be speaking up. They tell themselves it's not worth the trouble, that someone else will handle it. But that's not how things work. If you don't confront the problem at its source, it will continue to grow until it becomes unmanageable. Look at history. Look at the rise of authoritarian regimes, the collapse of corporations, or the fall of entire civilizations. These things don't happen overnight. They happen because people allow small compromises, small acts of corruption to go unchecked. They think it's not their problem or that someone else will deal with it. But problems don't just go away. They fester and multiply until they reach a tipping point. If you're being oppressed, whether it's by an overbearing boss, an unjust system, or even by your own internal compromises, you need to recognize that you're paying a price for that oppression. It might not be immediately obvious, but over time, the toll it takes on your mental and physical health is significant. I've seen this firsthand in many people I've worked with, people who were once sensible, rational individuals, but were slowly ground down by toxic work environments until they reached the point of collapse. It's not just burnout, it's a complete psychological and physical deterioration. Confronting these situations isn't easy. It's a battle, and like any battle, you need to be prepared. You can't just march into your boss's office and demand change without first having a solid plan. You need to assess the situation carefully, understand the dynamics at play, and figure out the best course of action. This isn't something you do on a whim. It requires strategy and precision, but if you do it right, it could be the best thing that ever happened to you. The worst thing you can do is let these problems fester. If you don't deal with the dysfunction at the local level, while it's still manageable, it will continue to grow until it becomes a societal issue. We're already seeing signs of this in the world today. Movements like Antifa and other social unrest are clear indicators that there's a growing sense of frustration and anger in society. People are tired of feeling powerless, and when that frustration isn't addressed early, it eventually explodes into violence and chaos. It's far better to address these problems when they're small and manageable than to let them reach a point where the only option left is conflict. So what do you do if you're in a job that's suffocating you? The first thing you do is prepare. You don't necessarily have to quit immediately, but you need to be ready. Start looking for other opportunities. Build your skills, update your resume, and network with others in your field. Be proactive in finding a way out, so that when the time comes to make a move, you're prepared. But before you leave, you should also assess the situation. Is the problem really the job, or is it you? It's easy to blame external factors when things go wrong, but sometimes the issue lies within us. Maybe you're not performing at your best. Maybe you're lazy, deceitful, or not as competent as you think you are. It's important to be honest with yourself and take responsibility for your own shortcomings before pointing the finger at others. However, if you've ruled out personal flaws and determined that the dysfunction truly lies within the workplace, then it's time to speak up. And this is where things get tricky. Speaking up is never easy, especially in a hierarchical environment where dissent is often discouraged. But it's necessary. If no one speaks up, the dysfunction will continue to spread, and eventually it will collapse under its own weight. A key thing to remember is that you're not alone in feeling the way you do. There are likely many others who are just as frustrated but are too afraid to say anything. By taking the first step and speaking out, you might inspire others to do the same. You might be surprised at how many people have been waiting for someone to lead the charge. Standing up to dysfunction is an adventure. It's risky, but it's also incredibly rewarding. There's a sense of empowerment that comes from confronting a corrupt system and fighting for what's right. And even if you don't succeed in changing the system, you'll have gained something invaluable, your self-respect. That's something no one can take from you. And it's not just about work. This principle applies to every aspect of life. Whether it's in your personal relationships, your community, or society at large, you have a responsibility to confront corruption and dysfunction wherever it appears. It's easy to look the other way, to avoid confrontation, but in doing so, you allow those who are weak and corrupt to win. And once they win, it becomes much harder to undo the damage. Consider Viktor Frankl's observations from his time in Nazi concentration camps. He noted that even in the most horrific circumstances, people still had a choice in how they responded to their situation. Some gave in to despair, while others found meaning in their suffering, and resisted in small but significant ways. That resistance, that refusal to let go of their humanity, was what allowed them to survive with their dignity intact. You have a similar choice in your life, whether it's at work, in your relationships, or in your community. You can choose to let the rot spread, or you can push back. It might not be easy, and it might not always end in victory. But by standing up for what's right, you strengthen yourself and those around you. In summary, life is filled with challenges, and work is no exception. But those challenges are what make us stronger. If you're in a situation that is making you feel weak and ashamed, stop. Don't comply with it. You have the power to change your circumstances, but it requires vigilance, strength, and the willingness to confront difficult truths. When you do that, you're not just protecting yourself, you're helping to protect the structures that support a healthy, functioning society.